Good afternoon, alien enthusiasts, and welcome to another Angry Alien Bulletin. A quick note for all of you. The merchandise store shuts down today. Actually, I'm just going to go ahead and keep it open until first thing in the morning on Tuesday, so we get a full Cyber Monday for everybody. But nevertheless, after that, the shop is going to close down for a while. Might open up right before Christmas, but I can't guarantee that. So if you want to get a piece of merchandise, like this awesome Apophis shirt, for example, or of course something to do with 3i Atlas, this is your opportunity, and all the details are in the description. All that having been said, time to talk about 3i Atlas yet again, and interestingly enough, we have another countdown taking place. We actually have 18 days to go before 3i Atlas is going to be closer to Earth than it has been during the entire time that if we have kept it under observation. It's going to be more than twice as close as it was when the Hubble Space Telescope took this iconic image, very famous image at this point that's probably going to be used to define this object for quite some time. But now that we're going to be a hell of a lot closer, and Hubble, James Webb, all of our largest telescopes are going to be pointed at 3i Atlas, there's a good chance that we're going to get a lot more details. Now, granted, at this distance from the sun, because 3i Atlas has been moving away from the sun since it achieved perihelion almost a month ago, in theory, 3i Atlas should become less active as it gets further and further from the sun. As the surface of 3i Atlas becomes more and more heated, whatever sublimation has been taking place that creates the coma that we've observed, all of that should get less and less obvious. And again, the object should consequently become less and less bright. However, when we first started studying it back in July, it was quite a distance away from the sun, and yet still quite bright, and yet still some very obvious features. And given that we're going to be really, really close to it compared to where we were at the time of our first observation with Hubble and James Webb, we're probably going to get some far superior images, and also from a different perspective. So hopefully we're going to get a lot more details this time around. But in the meantime, boy, we're getting a lot of details already, along with many images being captured mostly by amateur astronomers. And the capabilities of these people's telescopes is extraordinary. As most of us have probably noticed, it puts NASA's instruments that are orbiting Mars, and we had hoped would get a really good image given how close 3i Atlas came to Mars. Well, it put all of these things to shame, but there are a lot of other developments taking place, including evidence that NASA may be trying to cover something up. All right, first and foremost, I think it's important that we revisit in my opinion, what makes 3i Atlas truly extraordinary, a particular anomaly out of Avi Loeb's immense list of anomalies that we have right now that is extremely difficult to explain. And this is the anti-tail, or the anti-solar jets that we've been observing. And in this particular image, and I've never seen a comet look like this before, in this particular image, the anti-tail is unbelievably apparent. And once again, this is not something that's created by an optical illusion. That only happens when we cross the orbital path of a comet. And so therefore, we can sometimes see where the comet was, the remnants of its tail, ahead of the coma from our perspective. So it looks like it has a tail pointing at the sun, but that actually isn't the case. But as you can see from the trajectory here, at no time is Earth going to cross 3i Atlas's trajectory. There's never going to be an orbital perspective trick being played on us. So this anti-tail is genuine. This anti-tail is at least 1 million kilometers in length. And I think it's high time for me to thoroughly explain why this is such a bizarre occurrence and very difficult to understand if this is a natural object. The series of photographs that had been captured of 3I Atlas have ignited a firestorm of debate amongst the astronomical community. While the universe is full of wandering rocks and frozen debris, occasionally an object appears that refuses to conform to the laws of physics as we understand them. And this is the case with 3I Atlas. It may look like a comet, but it acts like something far more mysterious. And the main reason for this is what you're looking at right now, this very obvious anti-tail that is spearing out towards the sun to a distance of at least 1 million kilometers and perhaps even more than that. At first glance, this photograph does seem to show a standard cometary body, a glowing coma, but it's accompanied, as I said before, by this strange collimated anti-tail. And the scales of these structures is immense. The image depicts 3I Atlas at a distance of about 300 million kilometers from Earth. Its main tail, therefore, extends an astonishing 5 million kilometers into the void, while the sunward pointing anti-tail, as I mentioned before, reaches about 1 million kilometers. This never happens, and that's very important. To put this into perspective, if an object's measured speed was 400 meters per second, which is, by the way, faster than a 9mm handgun round, it would take an entire month to traverse this 1 million kilometers. But this isn't what's important. It's the physics that allows this anti-tail to exist at all. According to Avi Loeb, and there's nothing wrong with his science here, the anti-tail's ability to penetrate through the solar wind at that distance demands physics that stretch the boundaries of what we would expect from a natural comet. The solar wind at the location of 3I Atlas moves at approximately 400 kilometers per second. This is 1,000 times faster than the thermal speed of gas naturally outflowing from a comet heated by the sun. Let me try to put this into perspective for you. If you wanted natural outgassing to somehow survive against that kind of solar gale, it would be the equivalent of trying to walk or run at 5 to 10 kilometers per hour straight into the teeth of a 5,000 kilometer an hour wind. Obviously impossible, and this is why natural cometary tails stream out behind a comet, not in front, and in the very rare case where an anti-tail driven by exceptionally powerful outgassing can actually survive against the solar wind, it gets annihilated within the first few hundred kilometers, at most a couple thousand, not 1 million. The mechanics at play here involve ram pressure, which is the force exerted by moving material pushing against stationary or slower moving material. Because ram pressure scales with the square of velocity for the anti-tail to maintain its structure. And by the way, this is very highly organized structure that we have observed that's lasted for days and days. Against such a fierce solar wind, the mass density must be extraordinarily high, at least 1 million times greater than the density of the solar wind itself. Now, if this is the case, if this anti-tail is indeed comprised of a density that's 1 million times that of the solar wind, that means it must be losing mass at a staggering rate, approximately 200 metric tons per second for every 0.3 million kilometers squared on a side. So, and the anti-tail, by the way, is much bigger than 0.3 million kilometers. So when the main tail is also included in the calculation, because keep in mind, this thing has an ordinary tail as well, the total mass loss over the months of October and November reaches several billion tons. This is 10% of the minimum mass that Loeb calculated for 3I Atlas, estimated at 33 billion tons. And incidentally, NASA doesn't think that this object is that big. They actually insist that the nucleus must be much smaller than 33 billion tons. But if that's the case, the entire nucleus should have been annihilated by now. And even if it wasn't, losing that much mass in a short amount of time should have shattered this object. And yet, it remains completely intact. Now, the mystery gets even more confusing when you analyze 3I Atlas's movement. Non-gravitational acceleration usually occurs when a comet's outgassing creates an uneven thrust, slightly altering its trajectory beyond what gravity alone would dictate. During the summer months, however, 3I Atlas showed none. It moved like a rock, or like a craft under intelligent control that was maintaining a very solid and unchanging trajectory. And then something happened. Around perihelion on October 29th, at the moment that we couldn't actually see it, a measurable non-gravitational acceleration was detected. The detection is real, but the question is, what's causing it? For a natural comet, the level of acceleration observed would require more than 10% of the entire object's total mass to be expelled as gas and dust. Once again, assuming the gas moves at the maximum thermal speed of 400 meters per second. But again, here's the problem. We've already accounted for at least 10% mass loss just to explain the tail and anti-tail. The math doesn't close. If 3I Atlas is a natural comet, it should have lost more mass than it started with, or it should be far larger than observations suggest. Or there is another alternative. Chemical thrusters or ion propulsion would require a lot less mass because these types of propulsion systems have exhaust speeds that are much, much higher than thermal gas. For example, normal cometary outgassing, as I said before, travels at about 400 meters per second. Just regular chemical rocket engines travel at over 4.5 kilometers per second. That's a full order of magnitude. And if you're talking about ion thrusters, which accelerate charged particles to even greater velocities, it could reduce it by up to 4 orders of magnitude. This makes so much more sense. This explains what we are seeing, and the math ends up so much better with an artificial explanation than a natural explanation. And by the way, this evidence has been presented in more than one scholarly paper for peer review, and nobody will publish it. Every single scholarly journal refuses to even submit it for peer review, to give it a chance to hold up against criticism. They simply reject it as if we were trying to say that fairies or ghosts were changing 3I Atlas's trajectory. And the jets come with one more glaring inconsistency, and that is the fact that they are solid, collimated, highly organized jets being generated by a rotating object. This should be absolutely impossible. If the jets were coming from multiple locations on the surface of 3I Atlas, as it rotates once every 16 hours, which is roughly the rotational speed that we have observed thus far, then the jets should fan out. They should not be laser-like. So the only way that a natural comet could possibly generate anything like this is if there were one location on the comet's surface that is generating the jets, and every time it's exposed to the sun during rotation, it blasts these jets out towards the sun. But if that were the case, we would be able to see the interruptions, sort of a beating heart of 3I Atlas every time the object rotated, and yet we're not seeing that at all. Instead, we are seeing these highly collimated, organized jets that have no interruption at all, as if they were coming from an object that isn't rotating, and yet it is. And by the way, this rotation creates another mystery. The brightness of 3I Atlas seems to be varying from 10 to 20%, perhaps even more, every time it rotates. The rotation seems to change the brightness of the object. Now, according to NASA, the vast majority of the brightness coming from 3I Atlas is coming from its coma, which is not rotating. not from the nucleus. If that were the case, the rotation should not be changing much of anything about the brightness of the object. But as you can see from this sequence of images from Ray's Astrophotography, by the way, head on over there if you have never been there before. This guy gets amazing images of 3I Atlas. You can see a very clear shift in the brightness and also the gaseous patterns that seem to exist with 3I Atlas as it rotates. That should not be happening. A cometary nucleus does not have enough gravity to drag the coma, the gas that surrounds the object, with it as it rotates. Now, once again, even if 3I Atlas is a natural object, it is a bizarre one with anomalous behavior that should be getting a lot of coverage from the mainstream media. NASA should be glowing about this discovery, eager to find out more about this object, even if they continue to insist that it's a natural comet, instead of just saying that this is some kind of new brand of coffee, something with subtly different flavor or something like that, instead of these bizarre anomalies that absolutely defy our understanding of comets and the solar wind. But instead, NASA appears to be covering things up rather than telling the public just how amazing this object is. All right, at this point, we also need to revisit another really incredible anomaly. Again, a bizarre coincidence, if you can call it that, and it is the fact that 3I Atlas is going to be intercepting Jupiter at an incredibly useful location, a location that corresponds with something called the Hill radius. And this is the point where Jupiter's gravity and the Sun's gravity cancel one another out, or the point where Jupiter's gravity takes over from the Sun. And it is an incredibly useful thing to intercept a planet at this particular location if you want to place something close to that planet that's going to stay put. It'll be able to monitor the planet, perhaps move to intercept some of its moons. It is an ideal location to place probes that might be used for exploration in the future. Indeed, we ourselves use these so-called Lagrange points or solar system parking lots for this purpose. But something new has emerged, something NASA has done that makes me begin to wonder whether or not they're trying to cover this amazing anomaly up. David Farnashia, I'm probably mispronouncing that, at NASA's JPL Horizons website has been updating the non-gravitational acceleration or radial acceleration component of 3I Atlas's motion through the solar system. And on October 30th, 2025, according to JPL, normalized at a heliocentric distance of the Earth-Sun separation, the NGA was listed at 1.6 times 10 to the negative 6th astronomical units per day squared. By November 24th, the coefficient was reduced by a factor of 4 to a value of 4 times 10 to the negative 7th astronomical units per day squared. Now, at that time, Avi Loeb pointed out that the minimum perigove distance of 3I Atlas during its encounter with Jupiter is forecasted to be 53.445 plus or minus 0.06 million kilometers, which is identical within one standard deviation to Jupiter's Hill radius at this time, which is 53.502 million kilometers. Very, very close. Really, we're talking about solar system distances, an insignificant distance. Interior to that radius, Jupiter's gravity dominates over the Sun's tide, and any small satellite deposited outside this radius would be removed from Jupiter by the Sun's gravity. But surprised by the unexpected match between the perigove distance of 3I Atlas, by the way, perigove simply means close to Jupiter. Perigove, perijupiter, as opposed to close to Earth, perigee, perigaia, or close to the Sun, perihelion, perihelios. all of these things change with every single solar system body. It gets kind of complicated sometimes. In any event, the unexpected match between this distance and the Hill radius of Jupiter on March 16th of 2026, Avi Loeb emailed David his report about this unlikely coincidence. David did not respond. However, within a couple of days, NASA's JPL Horizons website upgraded the non-gravitational acceleration again by a factor of 6 to a value of 6.8 times 10 to the negative 8th power astronomical units per day squared. How could NASA have possibly been that wrong on the front end to require this kind of massive adjustment? And what an interesting coincidence. NASA changed their adjustment right after Avi Loeb talks about this incredible coincidence. So given these revisions, the new JPL Horizons forecast for the perigove distance of 3I Atlas is now 53.587 plus or minus 0.045 million kilometers. And once again, keep in mind, the Hill radius is 53.445 million kilometers. Did NASA fudge these numbers to put 3I Atlas just outside of Jupiter's Hill radius? Well, according to Avi Loeb, the insistence of the Vatican on Earth being at the center of the solar system did not change the orbit of the Earth around the Sun. For the same reason, the new model of JPL Horizons will not change the actual trajectory of 3I Atlas. We will know whether the perigove distance agrees with the Hill radius in the coming months, thanks to data collected as 3I Atlas approaches its perigove on March 16th, 2026. In particular, astrometric data from the spacecraft Juno or the ESA JUICE probe or 16 Psyche will be very useful for settling the issue. So that's the latest about 3I Atlas. Again, I'm not absolutely saying that NASA is doing this intentionally, but it is a very, very interesting coincidence that almost immediately after Avi Loeb sends a report to NASA and informs them that all of this is happening, that this bizarre coincidence of 3I Atlas intercepting Jupiter's Hill radius is going to be taking place. At that point, without sending any explanation or response to Avi Loeb, they clarify the non-gravitational acceleration that 3I Atlas experienced as it achieved perihelion. Oh, it's not as extreme as we thought. What an interesting time to make this correction. And by interesting coincidence, it barely misses the Hill radius at this point. Incidentally, that's still incredibly useful. It would not take much for a probe to be dispatched from 3I Atlas to intercept one of Jupiter's Lagrange points. It's still an incredibly useful trajectory, even if it does happen to wind up there. But as I said earlier, we're going to see where 3I Atlas actually ends up relative to Jupiter. Will it actually just brush the outside of the Hill radius, not actually coming into contact, as NASA is now saying, or will it pass within the Hill radius, which will put it within Jupiter's sphere of influence rather than the Sun's? Again, regardless of what NASA is saying now about this NGA, their updated NGA statistics, they're not going to be able to change where 3I Atlas actually travels, what the distance is actually going to be between Jupiter and 3I Atlas. That will be easily confirmed even by amateur astronomers. And if it turns out that 3I Atlas does indeed pass within the Hill radius, I think NASA is going to have some explaining to do. Thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, please consider supporting this channel on Patreon. Get access to early release content and some exclusive stuff as well, and our Discord server. Or, of course, check out the merch store. You have today to do that. And thanks again for watching. Until next time, stay angry about space.